In the past weeks, my content has shifted a little bit towards early access games. It's a branch in the game industry that I, at specific moments, like and want to support. In the mountain of garbage and easy money grab games, there are a select few that offer unique and different ideas for gameplay, art style, and storytelling. This is exactly what brought me to Shattered: Tale of the Forgotten King, a game that has been in early access and got fully released on the 17th of February 2021. But before I start on my review, I want to make something clear. Unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail here because I want to avoid a long ramble and I want to focus on the game rather than side topics. However, I feel it's important to say that this game is not a Souls-like, and if you ask me, the genre Souls-like doesn't even exist. The Dark Souls games are great as it creates an excellent mix of many game mechanics from hack and slash and action-adventure games. Yet the game, nor a majority of people, are capable of creating a universally accepted definition of what makes a Souls-like. Everyone has their own idea and opinion of what made Dark Souls, which in my opinion is good, however it makes it even more impossible to mark it down as a genre. And even if Souls-like was a genre, it is used similar as the pop music genre, which is just a term to indicate what is popular at the time right now. Just like MMO and RPG before, Souls-like gets dragged through the mud and is overly used as nothing more than a sales buzzword. If there's even a small comparison to make with a Souls game, then it will be instantly branded with the term Souls-like, which is just wrong and to me pushes any possible good use for the term off a cliff. I will keep refusing to use the term Souls-like until the day that there is a majority accepted definition for what it actually is, and I would recommend others to do the same, or at least avoid the usage as much as possible. And I know people might disagree with me on this. If one thing is common when talking about the term Souls-like or Dark Souls in general is that opinions vary a lot. But you should agree with me that judging and comparing every game to Dark Souls when it looks just a little bit like it is super unfair. Yes, there are games that are designed to cash in on the popularity, but there are more who are not and by this behavior are ignored and treated unfairly. Going into Shattered: Tale of the Forgotten King, I completely ignored any comparison made to a Souls game, be it by user reviews or the developers themselves. I didn't want that term to be the base going into this game, because from what I have seen of the game, it looked very promising with a very cool art style and interesting story premise, and I didn't want that look to be ruined by some corporate buzzword. Though I kept in mind that this game came from early access. There is a possible chance that the game's development has been abandoned or that the game released too early. But there's only one way to find out, so let's dive into Shattered: Tale of the Forgotten King. In Shattered: Tale of the Forgotten King, you play as the Wanderer, who awakens in a mysterious world called Hypnos. With no memory of who he is and how and where he ended up, he sets out to find the mysterious figure called the King, who could restore his memory. However, the King has gone missing during a catastrophic event that changed the world of Hypnos from a civilized world to a forsaken one. On his quest, the Wanderer travels across the world of Hypnos, exploring once mighty strongholds and forgotten temples, and slowly pieces together how this once mighty civilization fell, and what happened to the King, and who the Wanderer really is. And that is basically the main story premise of Shattered: Tale of the Forgotten King, or at least I think that was it. It is at least how I understood it during the cutscenes and conversations with the NPCs. Shattered's story is told in a very cryptic way, but it can sometimes be very poetic. It's sometimes also just really cool. I mean, look no further than the opening itself. I found the opening to be very intriguing and I really like this way of wording. However, having the story told completely like this only worked partially for me. Telling the story only this way makes it sometimes hard to follow, and when you miss out on a part of the story, be it by not talking to an NPC or getting distracted as you're being attacked during a conversation, or even miss an item with important flavor text, is something that will greatly affect your story experience, and once that happened, you are unable to recover from it. But by telling a story this way gives a lot of room for your own interpretation, which does work for me, and I found such room in a story to be enjoyable. Now, I could be incorrect about some parts of my summary, or even completely wrong, yet the way I interpreted and understood the story worked fine for me in the game. So on that end, I was mostly happy with what kind of story I got. Though there was an issue with the story, and that is that the story doesn't really change or develop throughout the whole game. Luckily, there were the NPC stories, which kept things a little bit interesting, though only just a little. You find them all around the world at checkpoints and landmarks, and in general they weren't hard to miss, but unfortunately their stories were nothing special and they couldn't carry the main story further. Whenever it comes to stories in games, I still prefer having at least some form of a clear leading thread that develops. It doesn't need to be much, but enough that it can serve as a backup for whenever you don't want to make countless of mental notes about every word an NPC tells you, or in case you miss out on something of the story. You could say that the summary is the leading thread of the story, yet if that is the case, it would still not be enough, as this part of the story does not develop further than what you get at the start. The story and its development felt a bit weak and shattered. Even though I paid as much attention as possible and tried to find all NPCs and leaving no stone unturned, it always felt like I was missing puzzle pieces of the story. This feeling only got emphasized on by the ending that I got. In total, Shattered has 5 endings and all have a different message or teaches you something differently of the world and the story. I really like this idea, but to replay a game 4 to 5 times in hopes to understand just a little bit more about the story is not something I like or would prefer to do. Every ending should be a proper closure of the main story, not be a completely different puzzle piece. What really surprised me was how immersed I sometimes got into the world. There were moments where I just stopped playing and looked around, soaking up every little detail the world offered. Unfortunately, some locations felt not unfinished but rather unused, like they changed purpose during the game's development. You would enter an open space or square that could clearly be used as a boss battle room, yet there was no boss battle to be fought and it was just a large empty square. What's even more of a shame is that there are even locations you can travel to that are not used at all and are just empty, wasted space. Traveling through the world is made easier by a hoverboard, but I refuse to use it. When using the hoverboard, I noticed that I became hyper-focused on getting from point A to point B, hereby easily flying by or didn't even take time to observe and explore parts of the world. Yet, when I traveled by foot, I did take time to explore the world and was able to enjoy its beauty a lot more. Though walking to the next location does take significantly longer, however for me it was totally worth it, as the art style of this game really hooked me and is absolutely fantastic. As I said in the opening, the art style is very unique, and for a forsaken, almost dead world, it has some great variation in color and atmosphere, making exploring new locations always something to look forward to. The only issue I had from time to time with the art style was its high contrast lighting. In bright areas, shadows were like voids, which creates a cool effect, but in darker areas, where light sources are scarce, the whole map basically turns into one big void. It becomes a challenge to see where you are going, and when there is also fog on the map, you can only see 1 meter in front of you, which is a bit annoying. I am all for dark, depressing atmospheres, but almost pitch black is a bit of an overkill and creates some frustration at times, when you just can't find your way through the map. There is an item you can use to slightly fix this issue. However, using this item comes with its own issue, as you always have a flying orb of white light around you that nullifies the atmosphere at times. Personally, I choose not to use the item and just accept the frustration to preserve the atmosphere the game creates. What was not my choice is how you fight in combat, which I have very mixed feelings about. It's definitely not bad, but I wouldn't call it good either. Shattered's combat is at its core a hack and slash with platforming and RPG elements. And while there are these side elements, Shattered managed to keep it rather simple. Which is good, as everything you see related to combat can be taken on face value. The handful of stats that you can upgrade with points you obtain from killing enemies are self-explanatory and work exactly how you expect them to work. However, it gives the combat a hollow feeling. Now, if they did this to match the forsaken dead feeling of the world as a metaphor, I don't know, but then they pulled it off. But to me, the combat was rather boring for most of the time. The combat feels really slow and clunky, and most fights boil down to stun locking an enemy with your basic combo. Once your combo is done, you dodge out of range of your enemy and wait for your stamina to recharge and the next opening to jump back in again. The more patient you are during combat in Shattered, the more you will be rewarded. You can try to do it a different way, like going in sword blazing and tanking all the damage, which to a degree will bring you far, but in the end you will settle for the get in, do combo, get out gameplay. Because of the simple implementation of the RPG elements, there is unfortunately not an option to create a different build for your character. Weapons also work along the same way. You have a couple of different weapons, but they are all swords. They all have the same combo except for one, and the only thing that makes them different from one another is their looks, speed and base damage. Yet, in the way fighting enemies work, it felt like base damage was way more important than speed, as beating most enemies don't require tactics, skill or risk. Risky situations where you get into a tough spot or even die are easily avoided, not by skill or tactic, but just by breaking down a group of enemies one at a time. The aggro range is pretty far and other enemies don't attack you if not aggroed. Even when they see you fight with another enemy, they will do nothing and sort of wait for their turn. And on top of that, most enemies can be one-shot by your charged heavy attack or with a full combo. The big dudes require you to pay a bit more attention, but that's still mostly patience. In the rare case you die, you lose all your upgrade points, which you have to retrieve by killing the enemy that killed you. But overall, combat against basic enemies was rather boring and felt a bit like a chore. But when the few moments arrived that the combat became interesting, it was immediately a lot of fun. And I really mean a lot of fun. Especially during boss battles, the combat comes to life as you get pushed to use tactics and you got to pay attention to what the boss does. What I especially liked during boss battles were the sound cues. Based on certain sounds, you knew what kind of attack was coming your way and if you would get an opening to counterattack. And sometimes you even have to use the platforming mechanics to dodge or gain the advantage over the boss. There are not a lot of boss battles and one even gets repeated a couple of times, and they're not that difficult to beat. Yet difficulty is not important for boss battles if you ask me. I'd rather have boss battles that use these cool gimmicks like with the sound over just dodge and hit it till it dies fights. Once I figured out the boss tactics, it was pretty satisfying to deal the final blow. During these moments, the combat really started to show what this game could have been if the base enemies had a similar approach in design as the bosses. After some of the boss battles, you sometimes get rewarded with a new weapon.
Did you say boss weapons?
No, unfortunately they are not boss weapons. The weapons you unlock have no correlation to the boss you just beat, which is a shame. It would have been very cool to adopt one of the attacking moves from a boss through the weapon you unlocked by beating that boss. It would have made combat a bit more varied, though only just a little bit. It would have mostly been just cool. Combat might not be overall the most exciting thing to do, however, luckily exploration was. You start off in Limbo, which is basically the tutorial area, and once you work your way through it, you will reach the open world map. From here the game opens up to you and lets you go into the wild without any direction or clue, which makes it pretty easy to get lost at the start of the game. The open world map in Shattered is huge but mostly empty and serves more as a transition hub to different smaller maps. I struggled a little bit in the beginning of the game to find my path, as I was doubting which way to go but also want to explore a lot, but once I found my path I never felt lost in the game again. Still, it was a bit of an annoying and frustrating beginning to the game. The way the emptiness of the open world works is very similar to how the open world is done in Shadow of the Colossus. Because there is barely to nothing to do in the map, you have time to think and reflect about what you have seen, experienced, discovered and done. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out, but for me it did the trick, and as I mentioned before, I also used my time in the open world to just enjoy the scenery and explore every nook and cranny. And exploring every nook and cranny is definitely rewarding in various ways. Shattered uses its platforming element mostly during exploration. Maps are designed for you to take advantage of jumping, though I'm not sure everything was deliberate. For example, there was this one building where there was a locked gate. If I traveled all the way around the building, I could unlock it and I would gain a shortcut. However, I could also just jump over the nearest wall and unlock it that way. Besides shortcuts, you would also be rewarded by items or these lore stones that offer you small stories about the world or characters. Shattered also tries to recreate an element that I absolutely love from Nier Automata. At certain points in the game, the gameplay shifts to a full 2D platformer. It's a nice change in flow of gameplay, however, it's also a bit clunky. When you jump, you lose almost instantly all your momentum, and from the camera point of view in this 2D setting, it's hard to estimate distances. Luckily, this game is very generous with checkpoints, and dying by falling will not cost you your upgrade points, so no actual risk is there. But fighting in this 2D point of view is something I avoided at all costs. Normally beating enemies is very easy, but here you get disorientated very quickly, making the fights annoying as you would miss the target or get hit yourself, because somehow you turned the wrong way than that you expected to turn, or you were further away from the enemy than you thought. But despite that, I actually like the idea of shifting between 2D and 3D gameplay, though it's probably good that halfway through the game this shifting didn't really happen anymore. There was one bit of platforming that almost made me give up on the game completely, which was near the end, where you get a platforming section with the hoverboard, which controls so unpleasantly that at the beginning I thought it was absolutely impossible to do. Yet after a decent amount of tries and hyper focus I beat that challenge. Though if I knew if there was a cheat for that part or a way to completely skip it, I would totally have used it. In the end, I'm still unsure if I really enjoyed Shattered Tale of the Forgotten King. I don't regret playing it, but every time I try to formulate a concluding thought about it, I end up with a mixed feeling of joy, sadness and disappointment. My thoughts about this game are basically stuck in limbo, which ironically is the name of Shattered's starting area. What mostly saddens and disappoints me about Shattered is that it had some good ideas, but it just misses the polish and refined details to make it work. It might be because it was an early access game, but saying that is putting it too bluntly, as clearly there has been put a lot of love into this game. While the story is not completely working for me, it had a cool message. The combat is clunky but simple and thereby fair. Combining that with an art style I absolutely love, and exploration that felt rewarding and cheating at the same time made ultimately for a very mixed experience. Shattered Tale of the Forgotten King is to me the perfect game to just sit back and relax and do some fun exploring and experiencing some great atmosphere and visuals. The art style and the world itself was definitely worth the price, and because the game is not too challenging, there was nothing stopping me from walking through the whole game without a problem and enjoying the good aspects. Yes, the combat is mostly boring, but the boss battles were a treat. And that concludes my review of Shattered, Tale of the Forgotten King. I hope it was useful to you. If you already played this game, see this review as a discussion starter. You might agree or disagree with me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the game down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. And with that all being said, I wish you a good day and until next time.